All right, music fans, welcome back. Harmless Dave here talking about real music in real time for real people just like you and just like me. Last summer, I spent a lot of time reading this book and doing videos related to it. Heaven and Hell, Don Felder. Every time, it's kind of like going back to watch the Eagles documentary. It never gets boring. It never gets old. It's interesting stuff. And Felder, unlike many tell-all books, actually tells all. And unlike the other Eagles, he really goes into detail talking about the debauchery and the craziness that this band was involved with. Um, and he doesn't do it in a way that glorifies it or makes it seem like it's cool or it was really cool at the time. He actually seems kind of remorseful and wishes that maybe he had been more faithful to his wife and so forth. So it's a very interesting read because it kind of covers the Eagles and then it covers Don Felder's personal life. One of the things the book talks about is the disappointment when Joe Walsh said, "Hey, Don, sign the contract." I can't really do a Joe Walsh voice, but um, that final contract, which if you just sign it, we can get on with this. You can still be a hired hand. By the way, when Glenn Fry wrote Tequila Sunrise, was he thinking that everybody in the future would just be a hired hand? It's just interesting that those lyrics are actually in an Eagles song. And those two guys were hired hand specialists. They were like, hey, Tim Schmidt, hired hand. Randy Meisner, hired hand. We don't need these guys. We're the brain trust, and everybody else, they're just support players. I don't think that's a good way to do a rock band. I think the way Chicago did it is better, even though you've got a lot of nameless or faceless people, even though diehard rock and roll people know everybody in Chicago, maybe not now, but they did back in the day. But the general public, what I often refer to as the casual fan, those casual fans don't know. They just hear the guy with the high tenor is singing, I like him, this is going to be a big hit. And so when it came to getting Joe Walsh to come back to the Eagles for Hell Freezes Over, you needed Don Felder. And the Eagles basically say, yes, we needed Felder there in case Joe fell off the wagon. We have Felder who can get up there and continue to, fill these parts and do what he needs to do. But people really don't appreciate, overall the chemistry that both Walsh and Felder had. Now, they do talk about this in the movie, and it's pretty special stuff because Joe Walsh was like a wrecking ball. By the way, Joe Walsh has a song called Wrecking Ball. I don't know if that's a coincidence or not, but might be a Joe incidence. Sorry. But he is. He plays more like with a bit more reckless abandon. It's kind of like a bull in a china shop. I'm trying to use analogies here. Whereas you got Fingers Felder, or you could call him Finesse Felder too. And their two styles were very complementary. And you'd almost want to hear what Joe, like his interpretation of what Felder would do and vice versa. It was just really cool stuff to listen to. So the big tragedy is at the end of it all is that Joe Walsh was content with being just a hired hand. Whereas Don Felder was like, hey, open up these books. I want to see what's going on here. It's like auditing the Federal Reserve, which they should do, by the way. They'd probably find less stuff going on at the Fed than they would with the Eagles. It's just speculation. I don't know. Actually, probably worse the Federal Reserve. But we'll never know, will we? On either case, we'll probably never know. That's the irony here. So Felder, like trying to be a good player in the 90s, said, yeah, I'll do all this stuff. And then he's thinking, okay, we're making lots of money. We're back. There wasn't a lot of talk about new music until toward the end of the decade, but that album didn't come out until after Felder left, and those guys, wrote all these songs, and they're most of them they wrote, and it's a pretty good album. It's, again, is it better than The Long Run? Yeah, if you culled it down and kept the best of what they put on it, it probably would stack up to The Long Run in some ways. But by 2000 and whenever that came out, 2007, I can't really remember now. By that time, the music industry had changed so much that the Eagles, yeah, they got some radio airplay, but nothing compared to what they used to get in the old days for new music. So Felder had nothing to do with that album. And I think the Eagles would have been better off if they had recorded their new album with Don Felder. And these are all the things that he was trying to negotiate behind the scenes. And obviously, Joe Walsh told him to just sign the contract. Joe Walsh was a go along to get along guy. He appreciated Don and Glenn's leadership. He trusted it, whereas Don Felder did not trust their leadership. And he was, Joe Walsh was content with where he was at, and he didn't want to upset the apple cart. And it's clear today that that decision was so big and so important that, as far as I know, Joe Walsh and Don Felder still haven't spoken to each other since Joe told Don to sign the contract. It's just a real tragic thing. But we do have the old stuff out there. We do have those highlight reels where Don and Joe are slugging it out on guitar. And regardless of, what the Eagles are now, we remember who they were then. And there's no question that Don Felder made some good points. And his friendship, I think, with Joe Walsh, if they were still friends today, you might actually see Walsh and Felder out on the road together, which would be a blast. Joe sings obviously a little better than Don. So, they could go out there and perform Joe Walsh songs. They could go out there and perform a few Eagles tracks. And, I think as much as I like seeing like Don Felder and Slash or Don Felder and Peter Frampton, imagine seeing Felder and Walsh. Well, I guarantee you, when Walsh signed that contract and Felder took off, there's probably some more paperwork that showed up at Joe Walsh's office with all the records on the wall, right? Probably like, hey, little side note here, Joe, can't hang out with Felder, can't play music. I'm just saying it's a very high likelihood that there was another clause or another non-compete or some kind of extra thing in there that says that you can't really associate with Felder because he's a traitor. He committed treason against the band, and you can't affiliate or associate with him. It's tragic. It's a sad thing because these two guys had a great friendship. They had amazing chemistry, created some of the greatest rock music in history. So in case you haven't seen this book or don't know about it, I mean, I've only talked about it a million times. Heaven and Hell, My Life in the Eagles from 1974 to 2001. Don Felder proving that, yes, Joe Walsh, unfortunately, was content with being just a hired hand.